So what I'm going to do is start out with something that was in the news because of the advisory meeting to the FDA yesterday, the so-called Verba Group. It's their outside panel of experts. Some of you may have been paying attention to that. And the issue pretty simply was, could there be an emergency use, or should there be an emergency use authorization for a vaccine before the big studies of any particular vaccine are completed? Some of you may know, and I'll just remind you briefly, an emergency use authorization says we've collected enough data, even though we haven't finished our study, to think that we've got something that is promising, interesting, important. I don't remember the FDA verb here, but it's, or adjective, but it's good enough that we think we should allow use before we complete the big randomized trial. And you'll know that many of these vaccines are having trials 30,000 up to 60,000 individuals. They're randomized. Some people getting the vaccine, experimental vaccine of Moderna or Johnson and Johnson or Pfizer. And as they start to collect data, if it looks good, quote unquote, then the company can apply to the FDA for this emergency use authorization. So that was the discussion yesterday. Should that be allowed? What did the advisors think? The FDA isn't bound to follow the advisory committee recommendation on that question, but it's an important one, partly political. When somebody says, not naming any names, there might be a vaccine by election day, they're probably talking about emergency use authorization, not a licensed and approved vaccine based on a complete study. It would be next to impossible to produce that data by election day. It's just enrollment is too far behind and the data hasn't come in. On a standard trial, what you'd be looking for is information about efficacy and then at least 2 months follow-up with your subjects to establish safety. So the Moderna vaccine, for example, just finished enrolling today. So it would be 2 months from now before they could even possibly say that we have a good vaccine. Pfizer is ahead of them in terms of enrollment and monitoring, but I don't think they're going to have anything in terms of completing the study with a 2-month follow-up until December, let's say. So everybody follow that, what the standard requirement is? You can just give me a nod. The emergency use says, okay, we're not going all the way to the full 2-month follow-up, and we're not going all the way on safety, and we're not going all the way to the end of the thing on efficacy. It looks good enough with partial data to give permission to use it. So one issue is who says so? And what happens there is the companies who make the vaccines have their own doctors who are sort of charged with safety. They're safety monitors, if you will, within the company. They would be looking at the data and they would recommend to a CEO or a vaccine division person, say, you know, we're looking at the data. It looks pretty good on safety. We're not finished yet, but we're okay with it. Each one of these studies has something called a Data Safety and Monitoring Board. It's a committee of independent scientists, usually biostatisticians, who are hired by the company to offer their opinion on whether any study of a drug or a vaccine should continue. Is it dangerous? Are they getting early signals of adverse events? Those are the groups, by the way, that shut down temporarily the Johnson and Johnson study, for example, because they had some sort of an adverse event there. But they'd also be recommending early application for emergency use because they thought it looked good as opposed to it looking bad or something happened that concerned them. How independent those people are, whether they have conflicts of interest, have divested themselves from any connections, ownership grants to the companies that ask them to serve in these roles is a murky area, poorly examined by journalists. Also, the stopping rules themselves. How much data do you have to collect? how do these people think it through to say, we're 2/3 of the way through and we like it, or we're 3/4 of the way through and we like it, or we're 4/5 of the way through and we like it. We haven't seen much. It's not that transparent. So we don't know really what the endpoints are. It would help guide a data safety and monitoring board to recommend to the company that you stop early. Everybody with me so far on that? So those are your two internal judges. They would then, if they thought things looked good, say for the Pfizer drug, which seems to be the furthest along, that the company then goes and applies to the FDA for the emergency use authorization for early use. Now, some other ethics fun. You can ask for early use for a vaccine, narrowly or broadly. Remember things like convalescent plasma that had an emergency use authorization? Remember the president's favorite hydrochloroquine drug that he was touting for a while? When they got their authorizations, it was basically up to a doctor to decide whether they wanted to prescribe it and to who and when and why and all the rest of it. Once you have it, it's out there and doctors can prescribe it. But you could also give an emergency use authorization that's narrow, meaning we're going to authorize it and you can use it, but only for frontline healthcare workers who are at high risk. And you shouldn't really be giving it to anybody else. So a big issue that came up yesterday in the hearing by the advisory group back to the FDA is broad authorization, narrow authorization, or no authorization. Take it all the way to the end. Don't break, if you will, the study down early, no matter what you're seeing, because you want to maintain trust on the part of the public in the vaccines. And we know there's a big trust issue out there now. A lot of people saying they think these vaccines are rushed or they don't like vaccines. So there's, again, a balance between let's get this out early. The president wants that. There's a political reason, or the White House wants that. Let's get this out early. Maybe it really is looking good and we could protect people against getting infected by allowing anybody to use it. Or let's put it out early for the highest risk of infection, most dangerous people, nursing home workers, nursing home residents, try and restrict that approval. Or, as I said, make it broad and let anybody who wants to prescribe it use it. Everybody with me still? So that's a lot of value in ethics choices there that the FDA might face if the company, let's just make it Pfizer, does apply for an emergency use authorization. They may not, in which case all of what I just said doesn't matter, but I have a feeling they will. I think they're pretty excited. When the FDA says, well, what is it looking for in a full approval? That's where you may have heard that they've said they want 50% efficacy and they obviously want safety as measured by a 2-month follow-up. Normally vaccines will be followed up much longer than that, 6 months or maybe even a year, just to make sure nothing's happening in vaccinated people that is untoward but doesn't show up right away. And that means that the company will be encouraged to continue the study even if it gets licensed, even if it gets approved formally for sale by the FDA off the big study, not the emergency use. So let me just rattle off a couple of other weird and interesting ethics issues that are going to be in this space for the next couple of months that I think many of you will be covering or paying attention to or asked to pay attention to. Number one, if you have emergency use, a lot of people are going to, if you authorize it, either narrow or broad, many people are just going to say, you know what, that's the same as licensing it. They wouldn't do it if it didn't look good. I'm going to try and get it. Now, that may not be what the FDA intended. It may not be what the data supports, but a lot of folks are going to say, hey, once it's out there, then, that's great. And then they're not going to sign up for any more trials. So somebody may say they've got an approved thing out there, even on a partial data. I'm not going to enroll in any studies that are currently enrolling for other vaccines. I want to go get that one. Does that make sense? You also may see people who are in the studies right now being followed for safety say, unblind this study. I want to know if I'm in the placebo group or the vaccine group, because if I'm in the placebo group, I want to go get the emergency use authorized vaccine. We normally would say in ethics that everybody has a right to know their status if information comes up that's relevant as to whether they're in a placebo group or not. Yesterday, there was a lot of insistence that under no circumstances should they unblind the big trials, even if there's an emergency use. That's pretty controversial ethics right there, very controversial. So I would maintain people do have a right to know if there's an approved vaccine, they should be able to go get it if they want, but it would really damage the big studies if people then said, well, I'm dropping out, I'm going to go get myself, if I can find it, the vaccine that was approved early, and that's what I want to do is protect myself, and I'm not going to sit in the placebo group. Another problem, once you get an approved vaccine, either emergency use or the first one out of the box to go all the way, it may become very hard to enroll people in other vaccine studies because everybody wants to go get the approved vaccine. The president has made such a big deal out of there'll be a vaccine by whatever, election day, Christmas day, pretty soon, that for many people, it just sounds like that's the best thing and the thing they want. But even approving a vaccine that's 50% effective and only on 2 months of follow-up safety data, it's still kind of not great. They're going for 50% in the approval on the big studies to make sure that there's a possibility of herd immunity, but we could see a vaccine appear that does better, 70% effective as opposed to 50. But just to be blunt, who's going to sign up to be in the 70% versus placebo study of the next vaccine? If there's one at 50%, a lot of people are just going to say, the president, a lot of people say that's the solution, that's how to get back to normal, I'm done being in studies. So I'm gonna do challenge studies after this, but I want to shut up just so anybody who wants to can ask a question about emergency use authorization. Well, almost shut up. Authorization is a funny word, just bureaucracy or legalese. I like to think of it, and my friend Paul Offit says this too, as permission. Because if you use the word authorization, it sounds like approval for everybody. Permission to use it is like, well, if your doctor thinks you're in a big enough risk group and it might help you, then maybe you'd get it, but it doesn't mean it's right for everybody. I think a lot of people hear the word authorization and emergency use authorization. It sounds like, you know, the regulatory people are good and we're done here and we don't have to study it anymore.
Dr. Kaplan, good to talk to you again. Angelique Kimlani, Yahoo Finance and 2020 fellow. My question is, I've been hearing about this, about the concerns about breaking down the phase 3 if an EUA comes out and what happens to, you know, individuals who want to be unblinded and take the vaccine. What then is the result of that for these companies, you know, conducting these trials? What way do they have forward if that in fact does happen? Because I know they've been asking for clarity on that, and it seems like the FDA, at least at yesterday's meeting, was basically shrug shoulders. You figure out how to deal with it.
Yeah, well, I don't think that's the right response by FDA. It's a big problem. They really could have a hard time continuing to recruit in the ongoing trials if one jumps in and gets authorization. And those who are kind of not quite there yet in phase 3 randomized trials, but are lining up to start, they could also have a problem. And then by unblinding an existing study that isn't finished, but gets emergency use authorization, some of those people are going to certainly say, I want to know which group I'm in and I'm dropping out, and that hurts the data. It's a mess. It's a complete mess. It means that a lot of our studies that are underway, you know, won't be able to get finished if the unblinded group abandons the study. Angeli, my point is it's a big problem, and FDA has to help here. It doesn't sort of say go back to the companies and figure it out. Normally, I mean, here's one way to do it. You might just say, look, you signed up for the study. You knew you were going to be in a placebo group. What we really meant was you are not going to get out of your blinded state because it was kind of a contract that you would stay in no matter what happened. So there's an interpretation that says when you agreed to be randomized and put into this study, You agreed you wouldn't know which group you were in, and you agreed that we wouldn't tell you or unblind. I happen to think the consent forms don't say that. Maybe they should have, maybe they should in the future. Maybe people wouldn't sign up if you said that, but I'm pretty sure they didn't go that way. If they didn't, then I think there's going to be a pretty good case to say, you better tell me which group I'm in, because the facts have changed from when I signed up and we didn't know anything to now something's approved. That's why I think the solution is give emergency use based on partial data if it looks good, but be narrow. Say it's only useful for the most at-risk people. Try it that way.
Well, I think that was my question, is that some of these participants could be some of those, not at risk, but like say frontline health workers, for example, could be. So then if they are the ones that are then going to break, you know, what happens to these trials essentially? Are they just, you know?
I think what happens is they have to recruit further and they lengthen.
Okay. So Kira, you next.
Hey, Dr. Kaplan. Nice to talk to you again. Kira from LeapsMag. I'm curious about what happens if an EUA comes out for one vaccine and then another better one gets approved afterwards. What happens to the people both in the trials who may want to drop out of trials and now get the new better vaccine that's approved? And what happens to people that already got the EUA vaccine? Are they precluded from getting a later vaccine?
Yeah, it's a great question to which the answer, and this isn't my expertise on the immunogenicity of these vaccines, but I've asked a lot of people, and many are worried that if you've had a vaccine, you can't take another vaccine because it might cause a reaction. And again, is that in the informed consent forms when people signed up for the trials? It's certainly a reason to want to know if you're in the placebo group, because then you're okay and you could go get whatever. But right now we don't know. And I don't think anybody's really willing to say with authority that if you had experimental vaccine X, you could still then take either the emergency use approved vaccine on top of it, or the next vaccine that shows up to be better. And part of this is, remember, as we stumble around in all this vaccine data, the endpoints we're using for efficacy aren't clear. We don't know whether it's 6 months of immunity, 3 months of immunity. We don't know. So it could be, Kira, that you got a vaccine and you are safe to take it, but you have to wait 9 months because then it stops working, so to speak. So that's quite a little boatload of joy. You can quote me on that.
So we got a question in the chat from Lisa.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in.
Yeah.
Thank you. Lisa Krieger, San Jose Mercury News. This is exactly what I was looking for this morning, so thank you so much. And I'm a 2020 fellow. Can you just elaborate on that 2-month follow-up? There was a lot of debate yesterday as to whether 2 months is adequate or not. Is that 2 months after the EUA has been granted, or are they?
No, I think the 2-month follow-up's in the protocol for the randomized trial. And it means for the 2-shot vaccine, let's say Moderna, you have to watch it for 2 months for safety after the second shot. That's why I think Moderna announced today it was done enrolling, or it hit its enrollment goal, but that means for data to come in that the FDA would use to approve full licensure, it's going to minimum of 2 months from now.
Okay, and then quick follow-up, and you touched on this in your previous answer. The endpoints, there was some discussion about that yesterday as to what are the endpoints and are they adequate? What's your thought on those?
Say that again, sorry.
The endpoints, just to elaborate once more, there was some debate yesterday as to the endpoints. Is it preventing infection? Is it preventing progression of serious disease? Can you unpack that a little bit? It was confusing.
We don't know. There's been no transparency on the protocols about that. I actually filed a FOIA with a friend of mine, Dorit Rice, who teaches law out near you at UC Hastings. Didn't get much of an answer. We would hope that there'd be more transparency about what endpoints are going to be used. It's part of this trust issue again, saying to the public, look, here's the endpoints we used, and we got this amount of protection, or we got this, endpoints have varied. There's some publications coming out now that say, what we should really look for is just biological changes that are significant but aren't going all the way to disease. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, part of that is a science question, not my
Right.
gig, but part of it is transparency on the protocols themselves. And I don't know that they're all using the same endpoints.
Right. That came up yesterday. Thank you. Final really quick question. There's a reference to expanded access yesterday as an alternative to EUA. Can you just touch on that briefly?
They're cousins, but they're not the same. Expanded access is an FDA program to get things out quickly, but it basically says if you can't be in a clinical trial because you're not qualified for some reason, then we could expand the eligibility criteria and give vaccine or drug to you, and hopefully still collect data on you. It requires approval by research ethics committees. It's a little bit more on the experimental side, even though it's a path to give more access to people who can't make it into a clinical trial. Let's say, by the way, they gave a expanded access approval now on the data. Somebody might say, well, we made a narrow approval for high-risk first responders to get it, but you could get it too if you were a meatpacking employee or some other group. But spiritually, it's a little closer to expanding the trial than it is emergency use authorization, which is more like this is therapeutic. This is intended to help you. But they're cousins. They're not way far apart. I mean, the reason is, and a lot of these expanded access things that the FDA grants, they don't get any data and they don't do much about it.
That's a whole separate route for them to have to take
Yes.
now if they were to jump on that.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so we have hands up from Taryn, Umair, and Andrew. Are these EUA questions?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So go ahead. Let's go Taryn first.
Hi, Taryn Mento, a reporter at the Public Media Station in San Diego. I'm a 2020 fellow. One quick question, I have two. You said companies have their committees of independent scientists. Do they readily release the names and identities of those individuals, or would it be included in any documents they're required to submit?
They don't. And it's interesting historically why. Well, I mean, I'm sure they're submitted to the FDA. They don't do it for a reason that may not have occurred to you. They don't want the DSMBs assaulted or overwhelmed by finance people and speculators trying to get tips about how things look early.
Understood.
So there's a lot of folks, I get these calls and I don't know anything about half of this stuff. I'm Joe Blow, I'm with, Ginkgo Associates. We'd like to know, do you have anything to tell us perhaps if we paid you $1,000 about this trial that you're on the Data Safety and Monitoring Board? So that's the historical reason. I'm not going to say it shouldn't be waived to regain public trust in the current process for approving vaccines, but that's why they don't do it.
So the only potential chance would be to file a FOIA request with the FDA and wait the year and a half it would take for them to fill that request. Okay.
Correct.
And then
Or you could ask the companies to be more transparent and say,
And-
make an
okay.
exception. You tell us who's on your DSMBs.
Okay. And then, if a narrow EUA is given and it is for high-risk healthcare workers, what rules exist to ensure it really is only going to those individuals?
That's the doctor's liability and that's it. So if somebody got it and they got sick and then they said, hey, this was supposed to be for ambulance drivers, but you gave it to me just as a friend, it's liability that way.
And when it does come time for, a distribution of the vaccines, I mean, is it like, I know that all the states submitted their vaccine rollout plans. Are we going to adhere really well to those plans? Like California, are they going to get an X amount of doses that they estimated in their plan? And then from California, they decide how they want to distribute it to facilities in the state?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. That would be the plan for the fully licensed, approved vaccine process. Washington says it's going to give allotments to the states, and then they're going to figure out how to distribute. You also know that some of the states have said we are forming our own little mini FDAs to look at the data, just because we're not sure we can trust what's coming from the FDA, which is its own controversial idea. Many people would say we don't need 50 mini FDAs to pile on top of the FDA. We should trust the FDA. And others would say it's been compromised. They've given in too often. But the allocation planning seems to be built around state-based committees, ideas, advisory groups about who should go first.
And you're saying that's only for, sorry, you're saying that's only for the fully licensed vaccine and wouldn't apply to any EUA, narrow EUA?
I think the EUA, what's likely to happen there is it depends more pragmatically on storage and logistics issues. Say there's an EUA on one of these mRNA vaccines that requires a lot of refrigeration, very low temperature. It's only going to be available in a certain set of places that can handle it. And that's not state by state. That's going to be, do you have the refrigeration capability? Can a truck keep it refrigerated? A lot of these, think of them as genetic vaccines. The material is very fragile. It requires very, very low temperature shipping and handling. So I think it'll go where they can do that, and then there won't be a lot of it. So we'll probably be pretty quickly fulfilling the EUA availability if they only have 20,000 units and they can only go to NYU where they have big refrigerators.
Okay, let's go to Umair.
Hi, Dr. Kaplan. This is Umair Irfan from Vox, and I'm a 2020 fellow. Just wondering, what is the prospect or the likelihood of EUA being revoked for a vaccine? Is there a mechanism for doing that, and how would that potentially happen?
I don't think it's ever happened. Can't think of a case. There are some EUAs on vaccines. Anthrax had an EUA issued, and by the way, it was narrow. It was for military people who might get exposed to inhalation anthrax. That was some years ago, but I've never seen one revoked or had discussion of what the circumstances would be. I'm sure if an EUA came out and people got it and then there were adverse events that involve death, something's going to happen to shut that down from the FDA. But I don't know, do they have to have a hearing? Do they have to wait for the manufacturer to report on whether they think that death is related to the EUA approved vaccine, which is what we're seeing now with some of these holds that we've got on vaccines? I don't know. And I don't think there's any rules about it. I've never seen them.
Okay, next up, Andrew.
Dr. Kaplan, this is Andrew Dunn from Business Insider. I wanted to know if you agree with this notion. I think it was raised a lot at the AdCom yesterday that if we end up with a weekly effective vaccine, would that worsen the pandemic as far as, a shot that likely won't prevent infection and may or may not reduce serious disease as far as hospitalization, death. And we'll probably see people relax on mask wearing, social distancing with news of a vaccine. How do you think that notion should inform EUA decision?
If it's done narrowly, targeted towards super high risk folks, I don't think that scenario is going to come to pass. I don't think everybody's going to tear their masks off because there's only going to be, say, I'm making up a number, 30,000 people working around nursing homes or in nursing homes who got it. And everybody will know they didn't get it. It's more likely that if you saw a approval of a licensed vaccine, but it wasn't a great one, that scenario then becomes a risk. People saying, everything, we can stop social distancing and go back to bars because now the vaccine is all over, not paying attention to the fact that it's only partially effective. There are a lot of people who won't take it. At least initially, they're going to take a wait and see attitude. Again, just so everybody on the call knows, there's always been an anti-vax movement, but it's been small. What's happened is a lot of people, due to this perception that the White House has been pushing the federal scientists to compromise or cut corners or move too fast or go at warp speed, one of the not best descriptions I ever heard to get people calm about vaccines, that they are going to just not line up right away. So I worry that we could see your scenario then. Not so effective, a lot of people don't take it, but a lot of hype going around that people are getting vaccinated everywhere. So we're all tired of all these other restrictions, so I'm done with that. But I don't think on the EUA if it's done narrow.
Yeah, and one other question on kind of the conundrum around keeping placebo control and keeping blinded through this murky period. Just trying to get a sense of the potential ideas that could fix that. One that came to mind is like ring vaccination, as far as what we saw with Ebola, as far as, you can combine sort of clinical testing with actual use of a vaccine and get a better sense of direct and indirect protection. Does that make sense to you? And are there other ideas to keep in mind that I might not be aware of as far as ways to distribute a vaccine while still getting better data than observational?
Yeah, so that's interesting. There are two paths that I can think of. One is with Ebola vaccine, the idea, and it was done before that with other diseases, you vaccinate an area where there's an outbreak and use that as a way to control the outbreak, but you're not giving it widely. So many other people, if they want to get the vaccine, still can only get it through a study. Everybody follow that. So you're regionally focused. A little bit like some of the efforts to contain hotspots that we're seeing in New York and some other places now. Instead of making everybody not go to school, you try to target a particular neighborhood where there's an outbreak, and then you tell all the other kids you got to go to school. Still in person. The other road is to say, let's find populations and places where they just aren't going to have access to the vaccine and run a trial there, but it's not like they have the money or the resources to get it. So if they have Brazil or, I don't know, United Arab Emirates, that's a place that Russia keeps lugging vaccine to, someplace where there's not going to be easy vaccine availability. You could then run a trial there while you're still giving it out more as a approved product someplace else, because the world won't be even in access. So you could, it's kind of a ring strategy by nation.
All right, so it's 12:37. Those are all the questions we had up till now. We were going to have you talk about challenge studies, but I want to get a sense, how many of you, if you could give me a thumbs up, either visual or digital, how many think you're going to have questions so I can figure out how much time we have here? So I'm only seeing a few hands go up. So, I mean, it doesn't preclude you from asking questions later, but I'm just trying to time it out. So Dr. Kaplan, if you could just talk a little bit about the challenge studies, and then we'll kind of come back for just, the final round of broad questions.
So remember, the standard way to approve a vaccine is to randomize two groups, 30 to 60,000 people, partly because big numbers, more than you would with drugs, because you're going to give it out to a much larger group of people, partly because you're studying prevention, not treatment, or looking for a response from a disease. So it takes more numbers to see whether people are going to get infected and then whether they get protection. You're usually having to lengthen your study up because you're trying to recruit over, it'll take you a long period of time to recruit everybody. You also have issues of dropouts and people not being followed. It's not like everybody who signs up for the study shows up all the time to be monitored or studied. So you probably have to over recruit some to get a big vaccine trial done. Normally, this takes years. The reason we're seeing some speed with those kinds of big randomized trials is that some of the vaccines have been studied for other related diseases like SARS, and people feel a little more comfort with the animal and lab studies, so they didn't do them as extensively and they went to humans a little faster. Another reason you can speed it up is that there's just a lot more money being devoted to recruiting people. So there's more budget. The companies are getting subsidies from the government, and they're able then to be more aggressive. There's more publicity about, sign up for these things and that sort of stuff. There may even be more speed possible because people feel at risk in different lines of work. Still, it's a long process. One way perhaps to shorten the usual timeline is to do a challenge study. Challenge study involves deliberately infecting people with the virus. You make a strain that's pure and looks like it will elicit disease symptoms. You deliberately give it to people as opposed to waiting for nature to infect your study group. You are giving it to people deliberately, and therefore you can do it much faster because you don't have to wait to see whether people are going to get infected naturally. You have some danger that people who are just out in the community in the big studies that take a year or more, the infection rate may go down where they are. And so they're not likely to get infected in the same way. That's hindered a little bit some of the studies that are out there. You also have a problem that people who sign up to be in these studies, the big ones, not the challenge ones, the big ones, may be prudent and still mask and social distance and do other things that reduce their chance of being infected. And I hope in getting their informed consent to be in these studies that you tell them that they should do that, that you warn them, you gotta be careful, even though we're giving you experimental vaccine, we don't know if it works, so don't get infected, which cuts down on the ability to get numbers. Everybody follow that? So those are things that slow things down. With a deliberate infection, you know where they are, they got it, when they got it, you can track them very, very closely and find out, what's going on in terms of the power of the experimental agent. You also can do something which is a challenge. We were just talking about studies falling apart or people not being willing to be in future studies once things start to get approved. If we set up for challenge studies, we're going to be in a position to say, look, we can compare vaccines in a challenge study because we're not going to even be able to run the big studies. 50,000 people getting vaccine A, 80,000 people getting vaccine B to see whether A is better than B. We may not be able to recruit anybody to that. You're also going to need even bigger numbers because both vaccines may give protection, so you're trying to get a comparison. Whereas if you had a challenge study, you could do a small number of people, and I think one place they're valuable is to compare vaccine efficacy down the road. Everybody following that? Ethics problems. How the hell can you infect somebody deliberately with a virus and make them sick? And we're not sure what the long-term side effects are in subjects, even if they seem to be okay. Maybe they're going to have damage that we don't fully understand from the virus later. Both are true. If you try to deliberately infect people, we don't have a way to rescue them. There's no cure. We're better at trying to save lives than we were maybe 9 months ago, but still there's no magic pill, despite some endorsements from some politicians about antibodies and so on, but we don't know what to do exactly, and there are deaths all the time. So one way to reduce the risk is to use younger people. They don't seem to be as sickened by the virus, and we don't see, at least it's not apparent, what the long-term effects are of getting infected. There are all kinds of people infected who are playing football and showing up at sports events and going back to work at NYU post a positive infection. It's not like we're seeing things that say you really got harmed this way, but taking younger people, say 18 to 30, is probably the way you're going to have to do this. That obviously limits the extendability of the data you get from a challenge study to younger people. Can you transfer what you find then to older people? Science question. Some people say not as likely. Some people say, yeah, you could. And I don't know. But I have been a proponent of doing this because I think a lot of our big studies are going to fall apart. We need another way to approach this. We need more speed than we're getting. The overall toll of the pandemic is huge. As long as people are willing volunteers, informed, they're going to get their medical care paid for if they get hurt, and I mean long-term as well as short-term, and they go in eyes open. I'm even a little nervous about paying these people because they don't want them doing it for money. I want them to do it for altruism. They would be heroes to do it because they are taking risks. British company has said they're talking to vaccine manufacturers over there about setting up for a challenge study. It still requires approval from different British government authorities, but they're making plans. They've announced that. The NIH is apparently preparing a challenge study viral agent, but that's as much as I've heard there. Belgium says that it's thinking about accepting a challenge study. Historically, we have done challenge studies, by the way, on other diseases without cures, malaria. We've also done challenge studies with drugs where we had a lot of uncertainty about the subject's reaction to air pollution or carbon monoxide poisoning. How much can you take before you get sick? Those usually, in fairness, don't go to disease state. They usually just go to endpoints that are biological markers that something's going wrong. I'm a little hopeful that down the road we might be able to design challenge studies using biological markers that indicate the beginning of infection and then shut it down, as opposed to saying we're looking all the way for full-blown COVID. But that's a fantasy right now. We don't know how to do that. So, not so controversial, he said laughingly.
All right. So I see a couple hands up from Kira and Lisa. Is anybody else who hasn't asked a question want to ask one right now? Let me just get a second to see if anybody jumps in the queue. Otherwise, we will go to Lisa.
Hi, Art. And I apologize. This is not on topic of challenge trials. And you just did it. You offered such a great summary there. So thank you very much. My understanding from Google is that Russia and China are now distributing their vaccines to other countries. Have you heard that? And what do we do about that?
They are. They're definitely using them in their own countries. These are things that have been through what we would call phase 1 and 2 safety studies, but not extensive safety testing in big groups, and obviously not efficacy testing in big groups. They like what they saw, particularly China and some of the early studies, absolutely, in terms of safety, but they don't know whether they're going to get 3 months, 6 months, a year protection or whatever, if any. They just decided it's safe enough, let's roll it, and kind of also offer it to people politically that we want to make friends with. United Arab Emirates, countries in Africa. They're not forcing anybody to take it, but governments are. You know, it would be greeted here as completely unethical because you just don't have any real knowledge of what's going on in a big group. When I say phase 1 and 2, for those of you who don't know, there might be 20 people in a phase 1 study and there might be 100 in a phase 2 study, and that's way underpowered for vaccines. What are we going to do about it? Nothing. Literally. It may turn out, of course, that they have a vaccine and it's wonderful. And then we'll be begging them to give us the secret formula so we can make it too. But I'm a little skeptical that that's going to happen.
For the nations you've heard where it's being distributed is United Arab Emirates and maybe Africa. Any specific countries come to mind?
In Africa, it's not a secret. I just forget.
Okay. Thank you.
And I know United Arab Emirates for sure. And one of the things that you would hope that people would do would be to follow people up. But I'm not sure that's happening.
So Google's saying it's a challenge because they have employees in all these places and they need to figure out what to do.
Yes. Companies, big American companies or European companies that have many employees there will be thinking, should we let our employees take this? By the way, just to make that even more complex, employees and their families, employees and their domestic help, the guy who drives them to work, the person who takes care of their kids, retirees. I just went through this with an outfit saying, before you decide that you're going to let employees do this, you better define employees.
Thank you.
Okay, so I have a question here from Mary Hines of the Las Vegas Review-Journal. Dr. Kaplan, can you elaborate on why you think a lot of the big studies are going to fall apart?
I think they're going to fall apart because once things start to get approved, it's going to be hard to recruit people to the placebo group of the next big study. It's that simple. So if I get 2 one emergency use and 2 licensed vaccines, even if they're not great, they're 50% effective, seem to give you protection for 6 months, people are still going to say, I want that. I don't think I want to be in a randomized study of a vaccine that I don't know if it's going to work as well as that, or I'm going to wind up in the placebo group. I don't think they're going to like that. And some people are in studies that may be ongoing as things get approved. They could also turn around and say, I want to drop out.
All right, next question.
Thanks.
Oh, Mary, do you have something? Oh. Go to Kira then.
Hi, Art. I have a question about the challenge trials. So if it's all young people who are in these studies and most of them are expected to get better anyway, how do you know that it's the vaccine or just their natural health status that's helping them recover?
Well, you don't, and you have to give it to enough people to really say that's significant. That recovery rates are, they seem to be getting back to health much, much more quickly than you'd expect from somebody doing it in a week. You're going to look for it in a day, that kind of thing. And that means you got to have a little more people in the challenge study sufficient to generate up that answer. But since there is an underlying response by many, and it seems to clear the virus with no obvious harm, you got to work against the baseline. That's also true, as I was just saying to Mary, that's why you have a problem recruiting people into new vaccine studies of unknown efficacy when you have partial efficacy, because people are saying, I want the partial efficacy, but to interpret it against the newer thing, it's going to require much bigger numbers.
All right, I have one kind of big picture question. Given what has transpired in the last couple of weeks and in terms of what the FDA is and isn't going to do, do you think they have effectively, beat back the political pressure, or do you think that is still a possibility?
I think they have. I think they're starting to get braver and saying, nope, we have to do this according to sort of the purer, more established standards of science that we use when we're approving any drug or vaccine. I think there's finally pushback that way, particularly from Han and the FDA. I think the manufacturers are also saying, we want that. I never thought I'd be in a situation where industry with profit interests and prestige interests would be helping protect the health of the American people or the people of the world by insisting on good science. But I think they are, because they don't want their reputation harmed by an early approval of something that goes wrong. And they don't want to be in a situation where they get liability because they were seen as pushing to get things accepted. So I think it's shifted. Now, if Trump were to get reelected, who knows? I mean, then the pressures come back on. So we're in a little bit of a political hiatus too, I suspect.